Generally, when a film is widely loved and barely criticised, it's because the piece has plenty of merit. However, on the other end of the spectrum, there are certain well-known horrors that seem to be elevated to godlike status just because they sort of always have been. At some point, we all get so used to a film being praised that we just accept it and don't bother thinking critically. Well, that's where I'm coming in to burst that bubble, so strap in because we're about to get controversial. I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are 10 horror films you constantly have to defend hating. 10. Martyrs. My brother once asked me, he said, "You're into your horror films, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, yes, I'd say so. Have you seen that quite obscure French indie horror? Oh, what's it called? The one with the religious people in the basement?" He, of course, was talking about Martyrs, the incredibly well-known and not at all obscure French horror circa 2008. For many years now, it's been one of the first titles that comes to mind when recommending something to a horror novice. It has some good unexpected moments, a fair dose of body horror, and some pretty decent performances. And it has the added benefit of being an international film, which makes you look really cultured and well-rounded. Nobody's denying that it's a pretty iconic film and a fair introduction to horror for the uninitiated. That, however, contrary to popular opinion, does not mean that you have to like it. When it comes down to it, the movie offers very little in the way of plot, character development, interesting visuals, or meaningful reflection. The only reason it's famous as it is because a girl gets her skin peeled off like an orange. If you remove that, nobody would bother, I can guarantee you that. Next time you find yourself fighting for your life explaining why it just doesn't impress you, know that you're not alone. 9. Wrong Turn. As soon as you start criticising horror classics, you're in for a bad time. I can understand this when it comes to stuff like Halloween or The Exorcist, movies that had an undeniable impact on the scene in general, but Wrong Turn sort of doesn't deserve the same protections. There are certainly plenty of people who love the original Wrong Turn and have really enjoyed its sequels and reboots, but there are also folks out there who simply don't get the hype. If we're going to be 100% cold and objective for a second here, answer me this. What exactly makes Wrong Turn a good movie? It has barely any plot, it's very predictable, the acting is terrible, and the whole herder mountain men bad thing hasn't aged super well. In this day and age with so much more on offer from horror, it shouldn't be controversial to admit that you just don't have time for boring, subpar oldies. 8. The Saw franchise. Now, I'll be the first to admit that the very first Saw film was a great bit of horror cinema. The ending twist, iconic. The fresh premise, interesting. The mood and tone, excellent. This, however, is where my praise ends. After the first film, it's all just downhill, and all the genuine intrigue is gone. People watch the Saw movies for the traps and just sort of pretend at the same time that they care about whatever twists the movies serve alongside them. The whole gimmick is just watch people mutilate each other for no reason, and anyone who tries to justify it by saying stuff like, "Yeah, but Jigsaw is actually just trying to make them appreciate their lives," is a mark. It's not interesting, it's not creative, and I promise you it's not nearly as edgy as all the superfans think it is. What, you think it's smart and cool that a psycho old man punishes an addict for relapsing into self-harm? Or that the traps are just so creative? Come off it. A bot could auto-generate those traps by randomly selecting buzzwords and stringing them together in a sentence. Next up, shotgun syringe bear trap challenge? It's time we give up on Saw. In the big year of 2022, I think we could all do better. 7. Irreversible. Speaking of things to move past in 2022, I'm adding Gaspar Noé to the list. I don't care how many op-eds or film majors call Irreversible a masterpiece or brutally beautifully honest or some variation of that crap. It's a shock piece. The movie is meant to shock you, to gross you out and make you go talk to your friends about how shocking and gross it is. We've evolved in taste since its release in 2003 to the point where now it's widely discussed that no piece of media actually needs to show rape. Sure, you can reference it, but you never actually need to show the audience the attack. There's just nothing to be gained from it. Unfortunately, Irreversible entirely revolves around showing a graphic rape. At its time of release, critics like Roger Ebert were desperate to convince you that they loved the movie for any other reason than its 9-minute rape scene. Quote, "It does not exploit, it does not pander. It's been said that no matter what it pretends, pornography argues for what it shows, and Irreversible is not pornography." End quote. Okay, Roger, but the more times you say it, the more suspicious you look. The film, in fact, does nothing but exploit and pander, and of course, whilst it goes without saying that Irreversible is not a pro-rape film, it shouldn't be lauded as god-tier cinema because it structurally argues against rape. Really, if we gave awards to every film that said rape is bad, the bar would be even lower than it already is. 6. The Visit. So this one might ruffle some feathers because of my reasoning, because in a lot of ways, The Visit is a pretty solid horror film that I definitely enjoyed in parts. If I turn off the critical thinking part of my brain, I probably would have been able to enjoy it more, but unfortunately we're all cursed with unstoppable thought machines in our heads, so here we are. My problem with The Visit, a problem that's also pointed out by plenty of others online, is that the horror movie logic of everyone involved makes this film so frustrating that you can barely watch it. The whole basis of the movie rests on a blatantly stupid premise that a loving, responsible mother would let her 2 young children visit her estranged parents without so much as dropping them off and waving from the car, to confirm that they were safely with her real parents, and the stupidity only gets worse from there. The amount of weirdness the kids put up with before asking to be taken home, and the sheer number of red flags they dismiss or fail to notice at all is just unbearable. You might have been able to enjoy the experience had you not been screaming at your screen every few minutes about how goddamn stupid all of them are. 5. Dr. Sleep. Whilst I actually did really enjoy Dr. Sleep, I, unlike many others, will not begrudge anyone who doesn't share my view on it. Dr. Sleep was surprisingly well reviewed, considering the usual critical panning of franchise reboots and sequels, but it missed the mark big time for a lot of fans. For some, it felt like it tried to be both a sequel to the original movie and a faithful retelling of its namesake book, but managed to do neither effectively. Straddling the line between the two meant that the tone of the film never settled to an enjoyable, consistent place, and when it went full-on sequel mode in its finale, the callbacks felt cheap. The references didn't hit right, the emotional beats felt hollow, and its inability to dedicate to one intention meant that for a lot of viewers, the whole thing was just forgettable. Unfortunately, because of its place in the Shining canon, lots of the movie's supporters dismiss criticism as bad faith comparisons to the original. But the thing is, it's okay to compare it to the original, and it's okay to be disappointed. At the end of the day, you can argue over it all you like, because I'm sure somewhere Stephen King is feeding off of your anger. 4. Paranormal Activity. Has it been long enough now that it's okay to admit you've never enjoyed a Paranormal Activity film? With the initial boom of found footage horror in the wake of the film's unexpected success, it seems that anyone caught bad-mouthing the film was dismissed as just not getting it. For a lot of people though, Paranormal Activity just lacked the very basis of what you want from a horror movie: scares. Many found it too slow, too lacking in action or plot, and its structure meant that there was very little momentum driving any narrative forward. This isn't to say that found footage can't be done well, because there are plenty of films that demonstrate its versatility as a style. It's just that this particular franchise, including its first installment, bores the hell out of a lot of people. Honestly, if you decide Paranormal Activity isn't for you, I genuinely feel like you're not missing out on anything. There are a million better found footage movies out there, and there's no point in forcing yourself to get through the million different franchise entries. 3. Insidious. When the Insidious franchise was at its peak, it felt like everyone and their mum was going to the cinema to catch the newest installment. For the life of me, I can't think why, because right from the start, those movies have been nothing but underwhelming. Even way back before I had any interest in horror, I watched Insidious at a friend's house expecting to be scared shitless. I was 12 years old, a massive baby, and yet still that movie failed to get a single good jump out of me aside from when that red bastard appears behind Patrick Wilson. You know the point, it's the one scene everyone knows. It's a shame because both James Wan and Lee Winnell were involved, and you would expect much better from them, but the Insidious films just felt like the most soulless, uncreative bits of cinema fodder imaginable. Everyone's got to make their money somehow, and I support those guys in getting that bread, but that doesn't mean you've got to enjoy it. 2. The Strangers. Now widely hailed as one of the best home invasion horrors of all time, admitting that The Strangers isn't your cup of tea can definitely earn you some hate. Whilst it didn't exactly receive universal praise on its release, in the years since it's gained cult status and a certain amount of respect for what it contributes to the subgenre. No matter how many times you explain why something is good though, it's not going to win everyone over. A lot of viewers felt that The Strangers was just another empty, jump scare fueled venture trying to disguise itself as something more. Often a dislike for the movie is equated with a dislike or misunderstanding of the subgenre, but that's just not the case. Even if you consider yourself a fan of home invasion horrors, The Strangers wasn't guaranteed your love. Some viewers felt that it was just Funny Games' uglier, friendless cousin, trying desperately to recreate the emotional punch and sheer horror of its Austrian counterpart, but with none of the effectiveness. 1. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The most controversial one, of course, has to go at number 1 because of how difficult it is to defend yourself in hating this movie. Leatherface is one of the most iconic horror baddies, and the tales behind the making of the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre are infamous amongst horror fans. It's a big deal of a movie, and it's a big deal if you don't like it. Even if you're going to defend the movie's quality and merit to your dying breath though, you have to admit that it's not to everyone's taste. It's gritty and grimy and very, very gross, and for those who prefer cerebral, thought-provoking horror, it's just not gonna tick any boxes. It's a very different thing to not personally enjoy a movie than it is to stand here and dismiss all its merit. And this movie certainly has a lot of merit, nobody's denying that. It did a lot to shape the genre and to introduce what would later become a huge franchise, and most people would agree that there's at least 1 or 2 killer scares in there. Essentially though, the film is a lot of noise, a lot of dust, and a lot of running around. Ranker contributor Mysterious Alchemist summarized in one sentence why, for many people, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is just a flop. Quote, "It felt like it was 50 minutes of nothing and then 30 minutes of just nonsense made very bizarrely." End quote. To each their own, but good luck defending yourself in the forums with that opinion. And with that, we've reached the end of this list of 10 horror films you constantly have to defend hating. What are some horror films that you hate that everyone else just seems to love? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, while I've got you here, remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. So as always, I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.